Find your path with the knowledge of others and become an illuminator for those who struggle. Guide their way just by being true and being in alignment, because it comes naturally to you. On self-discovery wisdom, we share to find inspiration with lessons for millions. We hope you listen.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Sara's View of Life right here on selfdiscoverywisdom.com. I'm your host, Sara Troy. I have been doing each week a decade of my life. I am 71. Somebody pointed out that's 7 decades. And so I decided to revisit every decade. And now I'm talking about my mid-50s to 60s. Now, being the dyslexic person that I am, last week, I kind of went from, decade to decade linearly, like the 90s. And of course, I was born in 54. So I should have taken myself to 2004, and I missed 4 years of events there. And I'm going to recap that because a lot happened in those 4 years. In 2000, September of 2000, I asked for a divorce from my husband, which I talk about last week in my last episode. And it still was a period of time while he was still around before he moved on. He lived there for another 2 years when he wasn't with his girlfriend. And eventually I said, it's just time to call it quits completely. But, I was doing courses, that's where I learned about true colors. I was taking other courses, alpha, beta, and all of that, kind of better understanding of who I was now, because clearly not the same person I was way back when, and, what direction I was going in. And he was kind of still very, very jealous of this because he didn't want me to become independent. He was always hoping now to come to my senses. And so it was kind of very interesting. There was a lot of jealousy around there, knowing I was out there. And I wasn't dating or anything. I was taking courses and coming home. And it's still a lot of tumultuousness there. But we did manage to go to parties and go to events and take the kids out. We even in 2002 did the last family holiday where we went to Fort Lauderdale. We took a little cruise. We were in Fort Lauderdale at a great hotel and just, had family time. And as parents, taking our children out for the last group holiday. And it was okay, it was all right. And we would go to parties and people know we're separated. We will get a divorce down the road. We're separated. And, how can you be friends? And well, why not? Because I think it was 99. I went to a workshop from a divorce detective whose basic thing was, you don't want to hire me. You hire me, the money is going to come to me. It's going to take a long time. It's going to be pitching one against the other, and you're going to come out losing. And if you're not fighting for custody of children, then, you don't need us. So I learned a lot from that, and I did a great deal of seeding. I think it must have been 98 or something that I went to that. And I did a lot of seeding of that, my husband wanting the break, because I knew if it just came from me, which, I initially asked for it, that it would be hard. And so there was a lot of seeding of him wanting a life without me, which I already knew. It was just him coming up to the point of verbalizing it. So 2000 September, I asked for a divorce, and then I started taking courses and started exploring life. We would go to parties and events together for the next 5 years before I met someone. And I met somebody 5.5 years after our separation. And, this person was separated from his wife and his kids. He had 9. And we started off as friends just because it was somebody that finally got my spirit, finally saw the essence of my being. and not just this humanoid Sara that, the ex found so much fault with. As he pointed out, I'm a man of image. Image is important to me, and your mother is both too old and too fat for me. And, like those kind of comments do not make a marriage. And so it was kind of refining my own identity. And this man and I would talk for like 8 hours straight, and he was in his cave of spirituality, and I helped bring him out and ignited that. I became his muse. Um, he designed and built a quantum electric motor. And we went into business, we were looking at people who would invest in it, the next development stage. And unfortunately, one after the other, we found the wrong people. We had found one group of people, but 2008 happened, collapse. And at some point, I put all my money into it. And at some point, we're living out of my van with the dog and him. And, I mean, I can definitely say I've had some experiences. I didn't know I'd ever be homeless and living out of a car. But yeah, and, we met people that were so stoked about it. Government people were so stoked about it, but nobody would put the money behind it. And then we found a group of people that one person did invest in further development of it, but we still needed money for pattern. And all it ended up being a year later is them wanting me out. So they had full control over him. And I was his buffer. I was his muse. I was his stability. And the other of them, I want more percentage, I want more percentage. And I would point out, we are here a year later, we have no pattern, the motor hasn't gone any further, you haven't bought any investors to us, why should you have more? It ended up completely erupting, them stealing the motor and ousting us out and flattened. And of course, that became a very heavy time for me, but that is a little later. We're talking about the 2004 to 14. And, it did happen in that time period. It happened more 2000 to 13, 14, that we kind of got kicked to the curb. Um, Actually, 2012, because that's when I started podcasting. That's what came about from it. So it was really hard. I had put everything out of it. I was at this point having to go on welfare, otherwise back in the car, trying to reignite my old business. People still interested in him because at this point he developed his incredible abilities of moving energy, and he had a brilliant mind, but he was just was very lacking in other areas in the sense of like, even though he was CFO for a company and worked with big companies, he was not um, a businessman, which I kind of thought that he was. I was the introductory. I was the one that opened doors. He would go through them and fascinate people. But what we needed was another party that was the closer, and we never found that. And so, there we are, bankrupt. The motor is stolen, really feeling bottomed out. At this point, our relationship was over, but we were still living together separately, but living in the same house, purely for economics. I had a cat and a dog, and trying to find places to rent with dogs was hard. It was easier, quote, quote, as a couple. But we had separate rooms. We had already separated from a relationship because I wasn't the priority in his life anymore. It was like, well, how do I serve him? Not the other way around. The other side of it is that he really did believe in my abilities, and where I had been told for so long that my abilities were not enough. He was telling me that I had the ability to do it. And like when I started the podcasting, he initially set up the site and he would do the audio for me, set it up into an MP3. MP3 I only did audio for 5.5 years. And until he said, I'm not doing it anymore, you're doing it. And then I had to take everything over. And it was always, had been brought up for so long, being told you can't, you're not capable. And I found that capability. I found that voice, and I found that I had something to say, and I was capable of doing things. And here I am today, 14 years later, in podcasting, and I do absolutely everything. The graphics, the audio, the editing, the works. So what you get is what Sara does. And could I do better? Could I hire people to make it all fancy? No, you're getting homegrown, organic content and presentation. But he was very good for me in that way. And really our talks, I loved our talks. They were very deep, very spiritual, very thought-provoking, very enlightening and opening. And so that was really, really important and helped me a great deal. But here I am in my mid-50s to mid-60s, and everything had begun to shift. And it wasn't just a chapter of surviving, it was self-discovery, right? And it very much was about rebuilding emotionally, physically, spiritually. Now, I had fibromyalgia. It was a family part of my life. I had to learn to live with it rather than fight it. And this meant listening to my body, pacing myself, and accepting that my energy was no longer limitless. And, sometimes I could function well, and others I simply had to rest. The more stress in my life, the harder it was, obviously, on the body. It was humbling, frustrating at times, but also necessary. It taught me to honor myself in a way that I hadn't before. But, at the same time, I began to explore who I was and, being no longer being a wife, but just a mother. And, my identity being wrapped up in the caring of others and holding everything together and simply surviving. Now, who is Sara? How do I define my role? I had 2001, I had discovered true colors, and I took the true colors, and the person that taught it to me said I was designed for this because I brought the spirituality into this. And I include Chineseology, astrology, numerology, and I look for the correlation between it. And I take people down a view of life course. And so I started doing those courses. And, it had a profound impact on me and has on other people. I still teach the course when people ask for it. Most of my time is wrapped up, obviously, in the podcast, but if people want it, they can have it. So we tried a lot of things and met a lot of people, and it really did teach me that there's an awful lot of people out there with self-importance, like investors and big and this and that. And after conversing with them for a while, I'd realized they're kind of little boys trying to be big. They're too scared to really make the investment, and there was a lot of ego involved. And self-importance. I'm very much about the importance of, importance of self, like look after yourself, but that self-importance ego is another thing. So, my children were growing. My daughter was at home, and at that point did leave and went out on her own. I was still very much in flux of who I was, and they didn't like the person that I was with, and I understand why. Um, he and I could have these deep conversations, but with them, he was nondescript. So they never understood why I was with him. And, it was something that was hard to navigate. And also at this point, the poverty stage of my life was just like, how do I pay the rent? How do I get food? We were trying this and we were trying that, and doors are being slammed. It was a very, very hard time. And it wasn't that I could just leave and go out on my own. There was so much constantly pushed against me that every time I tried to move forward, there was a pushback. So it was a real time of discovery of who I am and what's important. And but at the same time, definitely a time of tumultuousness, but a time of awakening and a type of understanding, who I am today. And of course, the podcasting most certainly for me was the opening of the door and putting me on a journey and an exploration that I had no idea that I could do or wanted to do or was good at or would stay with it this long. And it's really been a revelation for me. And kind of in a way, I kind of feel all the ups and downs and everything that I've been in, been involved in, but set me up for this. And um, we have to have the rocky roads to understand the smooth ones. So, here I was at 57 becoming a podcaster, and I am deeply grateful for it. And I'd lost everything, and I was kind of trying to regain my dignity, trying to move forward. I had no money even to pay for the podcasting. Somebody paid for my first month. I don't even know where I found the money. Eventually, the person I was with, because of the people I was bringing on, gave it to me for free. And then she went off with someone else. And I started my own network in 2013. And, my 60s was, I moved into my 60s and in 2014. Um, I still had an up and down relationship with my son in particular. My beautiful dog, Kokomo, Border Collie, who we got in 2002. I always say I got her to replace my husband. And you couldn't find a more loyal, loving, beautiful animal who is just, to this day, she's been gone 10 years. I miss her. One of my clients did a beautiful oil painting, so she looks at me every day. And, it just, my ex-boyfriend absolutely loved her as well. And she was very much the bond. And she was my heart and soul and my stability when things were rocky. So the relationship was up and down. As I said, no longer a relationship, but just a companion. And then it got to be that he started working with other people. Then Microsoft liked what he was doing, and other people liked what he was doing, and I no longer was of service to him. So it was dismissive. And I started a new chapter in 2017, which I'll come about to later, because we're only going up to 2014 right now. I was immersing myself in the shows 2012 and 14. I was getting to meet some incredible people through the podcasting. I was coming into my own. He was just a housemate at this point. There was really not much interaction whatsoever. Um, and my dog and I just that bond and love and the cat. And I knew that I was kind of still trapped there. Relationship wise, there was no relationship, but it was a housemate, somebody I liked, somebody the children hated. But financially, I couldn't get out of it because I took on a lot of hosts, but they were paying $25 a month. There certainly wasn't enough to pay my rent. Podcasting at that time, nobody was paying for anything, and it's difficult for even today for people to pay for your services in podcasting. And it wasn't kind of a moneymaker, and I was trying to live off my pension. My fibromyalgia, due to all the stress I went through, kind of became even worse. I went through some real deep depression. And the depressions where it's despair, where you feel somebody has come in and ripped your heart and soul out. No rhyme and reason, no logic, nothing to clarify, snap out of it or think this or think that, none of that. Because you're in such despair, you feel there's no hope. And I really was very, very close to what am I doing here? Now, I wouldn't commit suicide and do that to my children because I know other people who had lost their parents to suicide, and I know the effect it had on them. And but I was really at that point that if I walk, if a bus happened to hit me, it would be doing me a favor. And and then it kind of, I started coming out of it because I've got to be a person in service. I've got to be a person of purpose. And then with the podcast, it gave me that purpose and it gave me that reason. And for all the misery and all the people that had taken advantage and felt like had just used me and spat me up, in the podcasting, I was meeting people who had faced their adversity, their challenges, their obstacles, and come out the other side more positive. And it was a real great illumination for me to take my own path. So that 10 years, from 2004 to 14 was financially incredibly rocky. Um, Again, the dog was the consistent. The ex-boyfriend, I mean, we were still trying to get the motor to go. Brilliant technology, but it just never did go because they took it from us, the prototype. And just again, I was just so tired of people's promises, so tired of people saying they were going to do something and never stepping up. And it really showed me that there are just so many weak people out there. They're all full of mouth and just no action or content or intent behind it. And I just felt finished. And podcasting opened the door and gave me back my life. And today is something I'm exceptionally proud of and grateful for, because it most certainly has given me an emotional, spiritual, vibrational stability. And I've come in truly into my own. I've 100% accepted who Sara is. Um, I'm very selective of who's around me, and I won't be going down any of those rabbit holes again. And I'm very grateful for that. So it certainly was a rocky, very rocky, not to know where your next meal's coming from. Can you make the rent? Living out of your car, feeling used up and spat out, and all the same, trying to show this image of having it together, and feeling unloved, feeling unwanted, and then being burdened with. There was a lot to go through in that time. And my kids were busy doing their thing. My one daughter was living in Australia. Um, my son was on his own journey, a journey that I couldn't be a part of for a long time. And then, when he kind of came back on a different journey, we started reconnecting, but there was a lot of resentment from him of how he felt I'd let him down. And I always carry that guilt. That's a guilt I carry around. They know what I went through. They know that those last few years of the marriage was extremely hard for me, and that it was sucked the life out of me. And that's how I got fibromyalgia. It was a very tumultuous time, and at the same time, it was a time they really needed me, and it was a time that I had nothing to give anymore, just surviving the day. And then kind of coming into my own in the early 2000s, discovering things that I could do, discovering who I was, why I was the way I was, and taking that exploratory journey, and then the journey with the motor. And, all of it was just very tumultuous before the calm. And yes, I used all my money up on it, and I've never regained that. And I live on pension and the grace of donations, and people who pay a minimum amount to be on my shows, which just covers the cost of the shows. Um, I'm an enriched and abundant person. I love who I am and what I do today. Financially, it's not there, but it is definitely there in heart and soul and spirit, and I'm very grateful for that, because it's been extremely meaningful. So a very rocky 10 years, but a very illuminating 10 years, a very revealing 10 years. But when you talk about the roller coaster, extreme highs and crashing lows, and trying to find an equilibrium, and then 2012, kind of with the podcast, taking that journey, finding a different discovery, and then post 2017, which we will talk about next week, became the breakaway. So most certainly a discovery time, a low time, a high time, a revealing time, a door opening time, and a door smashing in your face time. I really went through it in those 10 years. Came out of it realizing that no man has truly ever loved me. They've loved what they could get from me. They've loved how I make them feel. but no man has truly loved me because they've not known or honored who I am. That is okay. I have 3 beautiful little grandsons that love me, and a son that loves me, even though sometimes it's a rocky relationship. So we ride the wave, and that was a very tumultuous decade, very tumultuous. Trying to make the motor, which I totally believed in, and still it to this day, it could have a life, but it just everything was against it, and the work that I did with the colors and with the numerology and everything, as I said, I was a muse for this guy. It took him down using the quantumness of the motor, using what I did in my program, and it took him down another journey, which then later became a reveal that him working with Microsoft and in his programming. What he's doing today, I don't know. I know I'm no longer a part of it. I didn't fit into that agenda. He has different people now that are serving him. So I wouldn't know what he's doing today. It is end of chapter, move on, next. And here I am with the next 14 years of podcasting, feeling really content in who I am, participating in books, writing books, producing books, helping my daughter with the 3 beautiful grandchildren, and just really at home with who I am today. But it was a rocky road in getting here. And I wouldn't want to repeat it, but at the same time, the lessons I've learned from it have been very, very profound. So that was the 2002 to 14, 2004 to 14. Next week will be my last decade. And yeah, it's an interesting life. I mean, this is, most of it's in the book, and it's there in the book in more detail. It's how I look at my life and kind of what I've learned from it. So it's the lessons learned. But this is just a perspective and looking back on my life. And I'm not quite sure how I got through that 10 years. I mean, I don't know how I got through the years with my ex, where I lost myself and retreated and became sick. And then this was a rocky 10 years of illuminations and possibilities and incredible moments into the lowest of low and bottoming out. So nothing has been flat and linear in my life. Nothing. It's very much about the roller coaster. Now I'm on a smooth trajectory. I'm not interested in highs and lows. I'm interested in the beautiful wave and the rhythm of life. That is what I'm living, and that's where I'm going to stay living, just riding the beautiful flow. So until next time, folks, I encourage you to look at revisiting your own decades and documenting it through video, through writing. Review it yourself. You'll be surprised at what comes out and what reveals, but also as a legacy to your loved ones. I really encourage you to do it because it is quite cathartic, but it is also revealing for them. But looking back at how far you come and what you've weathered just shows you how resilient you are and what you can still do and what is still to be done. So until next time, folks, bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show. There are so many more for you to listen to right here on selfdiscoverywisdom.com. Come and hear the illumination that's going to shed light on your path.
Find your path with the knowledge of others.